Hello everyone. In this lecture, I will cover Chapter 10, Project Procurement Management. Procurement is essentially acquiring the resources that you require for the project. In this lecture, I will also cover the addenda on Agile project management and will contrast that against the traditional project management. Our learning objectives for this chapter is to describe various sources for required software, hardware, or staffing, and discuss how we plan to acquire those resources. The case study that is included in the textbook for this chapter is an interesting case of the Agile company that provides or produces tequila in Mexico. The company was a merger of two previous companies, but one of the key reasons for their success is the fact that they were able to effectively outsource their infrastructure to IBM and then later on to Tata and be able to carry out many of their IT missions with that effective contracting approach for the resources that they needed. So, why should we care about procurement management? First of all, for most projects, we don't have the resources required within our own organization, so we need to acquire them from outside. Secondly, typically a significant cost is associated with resources that are required for the project. Thirdly, the quality of resources we acquire will significantly impact the outcomes of our project. And lastly, management of procurement and acquisition within the project and making sure that we have the proper resources acquired at competitive price is a key responsibility of project managers. These days, it makes less and less sense for an organization to develop its own software when it can be acquired from outside. When you consider alternatives to in-house development, systems fall in one of these categories. They can be a packaged software like Word, Microsoft Word or Microsoft PowerPoint that you can use for specific tasks and you don't have access to their code, you cannot change the program. Another type is open source software. The open source software, their code is available to the public, like Linux operating system or Firefox browser. Generally, organizations buy the support for any open software that they use from a vendor. For example, organizations that use Linux operating system typically acquire Red Hat as one of the vendors that supports Linux. Another form of software is software as a service, is when you use software essentially as a service on the cloud. For example, the Office 365 that is offered by GMU to students and staff is a form of software as a service, or Class Angle, which is the feedback form software that you use in the class. Another form is enterprise-wide solutions. These are usually integrating many business processes and business functions in an organization, like enterprise resource planning tools such as SAP or Salesforce. IT services firms such as CGI, Momentum are typically used when a custom application is needed by an organization, and of course they don't have the resources within the organization to develop them. This table lists the situations where the organization needs to consider a particular software source and the internal staffing required for that type of software. For example, if an organization is looking for word processing, which is a generic task in any organization, we need the internal IT and user staff to define the requirements for the organization if there are any particular requirements. For example, for many years at US courts, we used Word Perfect instead of Word because at the time, Word Perfect had the features required for legal documents. That's why it was more attractive for US courts. As I mentioned earlier, enterprise resource planning systems, ERPs, integrate several business functions, such as HR or finance, into a series of modules that are integrated, and they all work off the same database. So, for example, when you add an employee in the HR module, the same employee and that employee's information is available in the finance module. So implementing ERP system, it is very challenging and because they're very complex, and the organization that implements an ERP to be successful, they need to adopt the business processes that are built into the ERP system. These systems, however, when implemented, provide very flexible and efficient processes in the organization, and they eliminate multiple data entries and data reconciliation among various applications at the enterprise level. Sometimes organizations decide to implement the best of the breed instead of an ERP. In this approach, the organization may implement the best HR system and the best finance system. But then the organization has to make sure that these various applications communicate with one another so that the organization can prevent multiple and duplicate data entries. We said one of the ways or alternatives to internal development is using an outside software organization. This is a major business, and there are major global software companies. And this is the list in 2017 in terms of the largest players in this space. And these organizations provide different expertise. And from your perspective, really any of these organizations are potential employers for not only software developers, but also for people who have project management expertise. In the last 20 years or so, offshoring has become more popular as countries like India offer development services at a lower cost. When you're choosing these offshoring services, the organization needs to have a very strong business team that can articulate and verify the business requirements. At the same time, some of the outsourcing companies may not have the program management expertise and general management expertise. In those cases, the organization that is using them must provide project oversight. Another challenge to keep in mind when you're uh, offshoring is that you are going to have challenges of geographical separations, this time zone difference, and cultural differences. Procurement management processes, very similar to other project management processes, consist of planning, plan procurement management, execution, which is conducting procurements, and controlling procurements. Again, this is very similar to other processes as we have studied in the past. In the planning stage, we use project documents such as resource requirements document that identify resources required for the project. We then determine whether it makes sense to make the resource or buy the resource. If we decide to buy it, then we need to research the marketplace and determine what sources are available for acquiring that resource. After we identify the resources we need to acquire, then we need to decide what is the appropriate type of contract for acquiring those resources. We can, in some cases, when we have all the requirements detailed out and spelled out, we can use fixed price contracts. As the label suggests, this is where the vendor provides a fixed price for delivering the services and or products that we're requiring. Fixed fee contracts are those that are appropriate for when we want to fix the fee and overhead of a contractor and agree to reimburse the contractor's other costs. This contracting approach is good when the requirements are not complete. I actually used this type of contract when I was managing a building project for Chevron. I brought on board a general contractor, a general construction contractor, to work with us, to work with Chevron staff to finalize subcontracts as requirements are being finalized. Requirements for electrical, plumbing, and so forth. Cost reimbursement contract is where the contractor's costs are reimbursed in addition to predetermined percentage for, say, indirect costs or profits. Time and material contracts enable us to set a unit cost for labor or material for a particular product or service, and we can use as much of quantity of those products or services that we need to use for the project. Capped time and material is just a special form of time and material contracts where the total contract amount cannot exceed a preset limit that we have negotiated. Incentive contracting is when we provide an incentive for contractor to achieve certain targets. For example, if the contractor completes the project by certain date, we can provide an incentive for that. I actually have used this type of contracting for with safety and schedule incentives in the past, and they work very nicely. When we discuss contract costs, we have to keep in mind that majority of the cost is direct cost, such as the cost of labor or material. However, there is also an indirect cost associated, say, with management and support that is indirectly provided to the project. For example, the cost associated with payroll or office space costs associated with the contractor project team, that would be an example of an indirect cost. In order for us to effectively contract for services at competitive prices, we need to work with the contract staff in our organization to ensure that the contracting documents are clear and they're complete. For example, it is critical that the statement of work, SOW, accurately lists everything that the contractor has to perform. We also need to make sure that we don't select contractors just based on the price of that they offer us, but rather look at their entire offering and consider the quality of the contracting organization and their staff when we are evaluating various contractors. Another tip is to use incentive when it makes sense. For example, if an organization can save, say, $100,000 if a project finishes a month earlier, it would make sense to include, say, a $10,000 bonus to the contractor if the schedule is shortened by a month. So that's something to consider when those situations exist to provide incentive contracting or to use incentive contracting. As we just discussed, an accurate and a complete statement of work is critical for successful contracting. This slide shows a sample outline for SOW, statement of work. Note that, for example, all deliverables by tasks need to be listed in the SOW to make sure that it's complete. It lists all the tasks. Otherwise, anything that is left out can be disputed by the contractors that is not part of the contract, and rightfully so. When we identify a resource or a product we need, we would typically put a request for proposal or RFP together. This slide shows the list of activities for an RFP. And one of the key activities that need to be included in an RFP is the evaluation criteria by which we will select the winning contractor. These criteria need to be part of the RFP and sent to the contractors so they can accordingly ensure that they satisfy those criteria. One of the reasons I selected this textbook for the course is the fact that it covers Agile project management, which is getting more and more popular in many organizations. In this lecture, I will briefly cover Agile addenda that are included in the textbook. Agile project management is an iterative approach where we deliver parts of the system in each iteration, usually called sprint or scrum. In each iteration, we go through, analyze, design, build, test, and deploy phases. One of the key requirements in Agile is that there needs to be a product owner as part of the project team. The product owner is typically from the user organization or from the business organization. Also, the role of the project manager morphs into or turns into more of a facilitator in Agile project management. The reason for that is that Agile project team are empowered to resolve issues among themselves, typically through their daily stand-up meetings. In this table, you see the comparison of Agile versus waterfall or traditional project management methodologies. As you can see, Agile focuses on each increment or iteration, while waterfall focuses on the entire project. Here you see various activities in Agile. For example, in the planning stage, we need to define what is considered done in each iteration. Also, we need to have all the features that need to be developed on the backlog list, which of course that list gets updated and potentially reprioritized after each iteration. The daily stand-up meetings are the primary ways that the project team communicates and shares the status with one another. It's important that these meetings, however, are kept short and to the point. That's why they're held when participants are literally standing. That's why they're called stand-up meetings. Well, this concludes my lecture on chapter 10 as well as the Agile addenda. Thank you very much for your attention, and we'll see you next time. Bye.